Okay. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker this morning, Betsy Miller, whose pronouns are she, her. Betsy is the program coordinator for Ashrei Foundation's North City Photo ID project, which offers assistance to people who live in St. Louis by offering guidance in the process of applying for a Missouri non-driver photo ID card, including acquiring the required documentation. Betsy has been involved with Ashrei's photo ID project since the program's inception, first as a volunteer and now as an employee. Upon retiring from the corporate world, Betsy sought out work that has the potential to impact economic justice. The North City Photo ID project fit the bill. When she's not working, she's usually traveling. Betsy is the stepmother of 3 adult children and grandmother of 2. So here is Betsy Miller.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then I also realized I'm also a wife. I forgot that part in my bio. And my husband's the only one that actually is here today. So there you go. So thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate the interest in learning more about this whole ID stuff, which to probably most of us seems probably pretty straightforward, right? So show of hands, how many of you have your driver's license or non-driver ID on you right now? Yep. I think that's all of us. And so when I started getting exposed to this idea of this ID crisis, my thought was, well, what crisis? Like, you just go get one. And that's true for a lot of us. We just go get one, and it's relatively easy. I have learned over the last couple of years, it is not that easy for everybody. And so we're going to be talking about that a little bit. We're going to be talking about really what the issues are, what the barriers are, and then what some of the solutions are, which we think Ashrei is part of that solution. So before I go any further, a couple of things to know. One, I don't like listening to my voice for a whole however long we're here. So please, I'd rather this be, how long are we here?
4 hours.
Then I really don't like it for 4 hours. So I'd really like this to be a dialogue. So I'll ask questions, I'll hope people respond, ask me questions as we go along, so that we have more of a dialogue rather than a lecture. Does that sound okay? Okay, great. And then the other thing to know, only 2 of you, I think, in this room really know me. This is not really my normal voice. I am getting over the flu. I have been told I'm no longer contagious. So it's been over a week, and so I am no longer contagious. And we're gonna go forward. I would not have come here if I thought for a minute I was contagious, but still congested. Okay. So a couple things. Ashrei, that's our organization. Any idea, except Linda, what that word might mean?
Nope.
No? Okay, yes.
Forward.
Exactly, absolutely. It's a Hebrew word that means forward, and that's kind of how we see ourselves working with our guests. We are helping them to move forward in their lives, whether that's with certain issues, but we're going to get to that in a minute because that's one of my questions I have for you guys. Okay? So we'll get into our history in a little bit of Ashrei, but before we do that, talk a little bit also about the power of a photo ID. We'll talk about our project specifically in the North City area. But as we say North City, that does not mean that only folks from the North City are eligible for our services. Anybody's eligible for our services. Could be St. Charles County, could be Warren County, could be Jefferson County, anywhere. As long as they can get to us and they have a need for our services, we will provide those services. Okay? So there's no geographical limitation, there's no income limitation or requirements or anything like that for our services. So what we do, this is the heart of what we do. We really are focused on Missouri birth certificates, out-of-state birth certificates, and a Missouri photo ID. And normally what we are doing is a non-driver photo ID, okay? Which has all of the rights and privileges of a driver's license except driving, okay? So a little bit, I know this is very busy slide here, and I'm not going to go through all of this. I'm going to hit on a couple of points that I think are most important to understand Ashrei, and that's really in the upper left where our mission statement is. And we're really about promoting economic justice that relieves suffering and interrupts cycles of poverty. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, Mrs. Hugh, asked if we had any questions.
Yeah.
We just ask the question. Is Ashrei located in North City?
Great question. So the question is, where essentially is Ashrei located? Yes. Technically, our address is at the hub, which is where we provide our services, and that is in North City. Jeff Vanderloo area, if any of you are familiar with the North City area. Well, I kind of hesitate because we pretty much, except for Thursdays, are working remotely. So we're kind of scattered throughout the St. Louis area, the 4 employees that make up Ashrei at this point. But our physical address is, yes, in North City. All right, we are about the economic justice, relieving suffering, and interrupting cycles of poverty. So let me ask a question here. When was the last time you used your photo ID? What'd you use it for? What'd you need it for? Yes, ma'am.
I traveled through the airport.
Yep, traveling. Yes, sir.
They asked me at the doctor's office when I had the flu.
Yes, doctor's office. Yes, I had to give them my ID as well. I was, not feeling great. Yep. Flying, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Taking out a loan.
Taking out a loan, absolutely. Yes, sir, in the back.
When you go to will call and get tickets for a show.
Oh, yeah, getting tickets for a show, absolutely.
Buying alcohol.
Buying alcohol, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Income tax.
Income tax. Yes, absolutely. All sorts of things. And that is...
Voting.
What's that?
Voting.
Voting.
Opening any
So
financial
true.
account. Opening any financial account.
Yeah, anything financial, essentially, yes. We need an ID for all of this. So whether it is getting medical care and getting food, some food banks require a photo ID, some don't, but some do. Voting, housing, nobody mentioned that, but in order to, loan, I guess, but to apply for a loan for a house or apply for an apartment, you're going to need a photo ID.
Go to a hotel.
Go to a hotel, absolutely. Absolutely. Temporary housing. Some shelters also require a photo ID. Some hotels usually do require some form of photo ID. Education. Can't really get your kids in school. Can't really go to school yourself without some sort of identification. And getting a job. Right? We have to prove to our employers, and the employers have to prove to the United States government that they are employing either U.S. citizens or legal residents, and that is needed in order to gain a job. So really almost any aspect of our life, we need a photo ID. Does anybody, I'm going to age myself, anybody remember when some of this wasn't the case? I remember the first time I went to the doctor and they wanted my photo ID. I was like, what? It didn't used to be this way. And so the need for a photo ID has increased. In particular, it's increased after 9/11. Some more rules and regulations have been put in place in order to comply with some laws that were put in place after that. Also, voting is a relatively new one for photo ID. We had to have a different form of ID, but not a photo ID in the state of Missouri and lots of other states. And so that is a relatively new one for us as well. All right. So we all have our ID, right? But roughly 1 in 8 adults in the country, so 30 million people, do not have a valid driver's license or another form of ID. Okay? So 1 in 8. And down below, even an estimated 15 to 18 million adults do not have access to the documents really that underlie what you would need for a photo ID. Okay, their citizenship, their birth certificate, whatever the case may be. All right. Have you gone to renew your driver's license lately? I know you have. What did you need?
It depends where you go.
And that is true. Depends on where you go. Yes, sir.
Had to bring the birth certificate.
Yep. You need your birth certificate.
Marriage license.
Yes, if particularly it impacts women particularly more than men, but if you've been married and changed your last name, you need that chain of information proving your name.
I had to have 2 bills for my address that proved that I lived there.
Absolutely. And you also have to have proof of residence. And so we're going to talk about all of these things because there are folks that don't have their birth certificates. We've been working with one gentleman for probably almost a year and a half at this point, trying to get his birth certificate. So it is, there are clear challenges for some folks in terms of getting those documents. Do these numbers surprise you at all?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't think it was 30 million people.
Yeah, a surprise that it's 30 million. Yeah, it's quite a lot, right? I mean, that's quite a lot, particularly when all of us we're sitting here and we've got it. And this is some of what was going through my brain when I was starting to learn about this. Like for me, it seems so easy. For the people I know, it seems so easy. For 30 million, it clearly isn't so easy. All right, so we've talked about this a little bit in terms of why people need a photo ID, and this is our data. Well, I say it's our data, and it's also data of other organizations across the state that do very similar work to us. So the number one reason people come in to our organization or one that's like ours across the state to get a photo ID is to get a job. All right, it is employment. Either they have to they're looking for a job and they know they need their photo ID. Also, a lot of times people will come to us and say, I've got a job lined up. It starts on Monday. I need to have my photo ID. All right, and so we work with them to do that. But number one reason is for employment. And then the second reason is housing. We see that all the time. Employment and housing, job and apartment, whatever the case may be. A lot of times those two go hand in hand. And then we can see from the rest of it, we're talking about public benefits, cashing checks, medical, basic services, legal services. Voting is in there. We did see an increase, though, I will say, September, October. We saw a bit of an increase in the people who were coming to us for a photo ID so they could vote. Photo ID so they could vote, if I said that right. Okay. But I'll also argue, well, I'm up there with voting is important, and I would love everybody to vote. When somebody's looking at getting a job and how they're going to feed themselves and where they're going to be living, voting probably isn't the top of the priority list. But if we can help them get some of the other things straightened out because they have a photo ID, then voting becomes something that they're thinking about. All right, barriers. So why don't people have these documents, right? So again, we ask people, the number one issue is the cost. Cost is a barrier for a lot of the folks that we are working with. I would say for almost all the folks that we are working with. Transportation, and then required documents, which is kind of a catch-22 because you've got to have the money to get the documents. So it just kind of goes in a circle. So we'll stick with the state of Missouri. How much does a birth certificate cost in the state of Missouri? What are your thoughts? Except Linda.
$50.
How much?
50.
Dang, no. No, a bit lower than that.
I was gonna say 15.
It's 15. Okay, so it's $15. And for a non-driver ID, except Linda, how much does that cost?
16
It's $18 for a non-driver. For a driver, I think it's 27, right? 27, okay. But for a non-driver, it's 18. So it's $33 for somebody to get a birth certificate, in order to get their ID. So those two together, $33. And again, for me, that's probably not a big issue. For someone without a job or who's unhoused, that is a big issue. And so that's one of the main benefits, I think, of our program and others like ours throughout the state, is that we are fortunate enough to have the funding to provide, a lot of people call them vouchers. They're checks. I mean, they're literal checks that we write out to the Department of Revenue or Vital Records Office so they can take those checks there and get their documents. Okay? Transportation. I know you guys are out in St. Charles County. I should have looked this up. I did not. I'm more familiar, obviously, with the city of St. Louis. City of St. Louis, what's our population? 350,000 people, maybe. Do you know how many DMVs there are in the city of St. Louis for 350,000 people?
Two?
Two is close. It was two until about 4 months ago. We now have three. So they're
Wow.
a couple of them are kind of close together, and then one is further south. So North St. Louis really has none. There's one on Lindell that you could say is close. I wouldn't really call it North St. Louis, but I mean it's the closest one to North St. Louis. There used to be one in City Hall, which made it very nice because there was also a Vital Records office in City Hall. Go to City Hall, you can go to the same building and get your ID. It's no longer the case. There's one that's not too far from City Hall, but it's no longer in the building. So transportation is an issue. I'd say a lot of our folks are riding the bus system. It's not the most reliable system around, and it can take folks a couple hours to get to where they need to go, because some of the buses will run once an hour, and they'll be on the bus for 45 minutes or so to get where they need to go. So transportation is an issue. We also, I think, are fairly fortunate in that our program is able to provide bus tickets. So once they get to us, we can provide them the bus tickets to get where they need to go. Required documents, we again help with that. One of the other issues, sometimes for some folks, is also a Social Security card is sort of required if it's been the first ID someone has had. Or they haven't had an ID in Missouri in the last 10 or 12 years, they will have to provide proof of their Social Security number, which sometimes is a Social Security card. Do you know what you need to get your Social Security card?
Birth certificate.
Birth certificate and photo ID. I am not kidding. I mean, that is what it says in the documents. Now, we have come across some workarounds, so we can work through some things with folks. But there's a lot of hoops for people to jump through. Like for example, somebody goes in with a medical record with a wet signature, so a medical professional's actually signed it. It has their name, their birth date on it, and a wet signature. That will take the place of a photo ID when they go get their Social Security card replaced. So now I got to make medical appointments for people. And, that's not always the easiest thing to do, even though in our building where we work, we have a Mercy clinic. You'd think that would be easy. It is not, because what do they need to see somebody? Photo ID. Right, so there's all of these kind of cycles and circles that come back to this kind of challenge, obviously, that people are facing. So we've talked about some of these barriers, right? The documentation requirements. What do you need to get a birth certificate?
Address?
Photo ID. Or 2 things with your name on it. So I will say, and we're going to come back to this in a minute, but I will say Missouri, I'm going to give the state a little bit of credit here. It is fairly straightforward to get a birth certificate in the state of Missouri. They also make it relatively easy, because if you were born in Kansas City, Missouri, so if you were born in Jackson County, where can you go to get your birth certificate in Missouri? You can go anywhere.
Yeah.
And we're one of few states that allows that. So a lot of other states, like Illinois, if you were born in St. Clair County, you're going over to St. Clair County. Or you're ordering it from the state, right, Springfield. So you can always order from the state. County's usually quicker. But you're going to that county. If you were born in Chicago, you're going to Cook County. And you could live down in Benton, Illinois, but you're going to have to go up to Cook County or mail it in, obviously. But Missouri makes it relatively straightforward to get a birth certificate. We got that, okay? So we talked about the costs. There are the primary costs that we talked about, but there's also the secondary costs. Because when is a DMV open? Work hours. Exactly. Maybe every once in a while on a Saturday, but still there are a lot of people who work on a Saturday too. So there are the costs of not being at work. And again, for some of us, it's probably not an issue. For others, that's lost income. Limited availability of the ID services. We talked about the hours, location, how people can get there, how accessible they are. Accessibility is another issue that we're trying to work through on a statewide level, not at an organization level, not at an Ashrei level. But in order to get your photo ID, you have to be physically present at the DMV. And there are folks that cannot physically get to a DMV. And so they, at that point, don't have an ID, can't vote. All the things that we talked about become that challenge. I had somebody from, I won't remember. It was one of the smaller communities in North County. They had a Woodson Terrace, maybe. They had a first responder that had been injured on the job, was no longer working, and could not physically get into the DMV. And she was asking my advice, like, what do we do? And I said, well, there's not a whole lot you can do. That individual has to be physically present. I said, but if you want to try it, I mean, call up the DMV and tell them the situation. I mean, if they're going to bend the rules for anybody, it's going to be a first responder, right? I don't know the outcome of that, but, there's somebody that could not get in to a DMV to renew an ID, first responder, injured in the line of duty, and that's that, unless they came up with a workaround. Confusing patchwork of policies. Yeah, you go to one DMV office and it's one thing, and you go to another and you hear a little different story, and they take different documents, and sometimes it's just you find the most friendly DMV you can, right? And then discrimination. I do think that at times there are some issues of discrimination going on that make things a little bit more difficult for those that don't look like me, don't live in the same area as me, aren't the same economic status as me, that just make things more difficult than they have to be. Voter ID, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I think my guess is we all know about this law. Right now we have to show a photo ID, a government-issued photo ID. Used to be we had other IDs that we could show, other forms of identification. It's no longer the case. All right, so for folks to exercise their fundamental constitutional right to vote, have to have a photo ID. And we come back to and that costs, at least in the state of Missouri, $33. Now, if somebody was born and lives in Missouri now and they're born out of state, that could cost a lot more. Like a birth certificate from California is $32. And then you got to wait 3 months for that to come in to go get your photo ID. So there has been a response from the Secretary of State to this issue of, well, if people need photo ID to vote, they can't afford it, we'll make it free. Great. There are some challenges with that. One is that when it was issued, this was one photo ID in your lifetime. So you could vote essentially for 6 years, because that's how long they're good for. Also, the state will not issue a replacement photo ID. So if somebody has a photo ID today, they lose it tomorrow, and they want to vote the next election cycle, they are not eligible for a free one. Never understood that, but that's the way it is. Also, I'll stick with the Go Vote Missouri real quick. We've had one person a couple weeks ago that went to use their free ID to vote. There's certain requirements that somebody has to meet, and this individual did. So instead of giving them a check, we said, hey, you get your free ID to vote. DMV would not do it because it's not election season. Right. And so then I asked, and the person was with a caseworker, and the caseworker is the one that called me. And I said, well, let's try, if you don't mind, try a different one. They went to a different location. Both of these were in the city of St. Louis, and got the same kind of response, but they finally reluctantly did it. And I'm thinking, what do you mean it's not election season? Like, there's a primary, at least in the city of St. Louis, that's going on right now. It is.
Every year.
Right. We have multiple elections in a given year. It's always election season. So I'm not sure what's up with that. But even though we do have this provision within available to us as citizens and residents in our state, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. Okay. You want to know about our history? Right?
Yeah.
All right, St. Francis Xavier College Church. Has anybody heard of them except Linda?
Yeah.
All right, so where are they located? You know? Yep, SLU. They are the church that is on the property of SLU, Grand, and Lindell. They have had a program similar to ours, or I should say we have a program similar to theirs, because they've been in existence for 30-some years. So Ashrei really came out of some work that Susan Talvey, a rabbi at that time, Central Reform Congregation, was doing out of Ferguson and the events that happened there a few years ago. And so as Ashrei was trying to figure out what to do, where to kind of put their feet, if you will. They knew it was going to be around social justice in some fashion, but what? That's very broad. We had our executive director, Sarah Ruiz, on board at that point, and she had gone up to talk to Pastor Andre at the Hub. And again, the Hub, Jeff Vanderloo area in North St. Louis. And at that time, the Tabernacle Community Development Corporation, which is kind of an umbrella organization for the Hub, and College Church had tried a remote kind of clinic idea at the Hub. And they had some success, but the issue was capacity. And so that was relayed to Sarah, and when she was up there touring the facility and talking with Pastor Andre. And so her comment was, so there's a need, but there's not capacity to fill the need. We'll fill the need. And so that is how Ashrei started in this area of photo ID access. Seems pretty simple, but that's really how it happened. There was a need. Ashrei had some funding. Let's put this forth and see what we can do. And we've, I would say, done quite a bit, and we'll get to some numbers in a little bit. But what we do is we provide the logistical assistance and the financial assistance. So not only do folks need the dollars, right, to go get their documents, they have to have all the stuff that they need in order to go get those documents. So like we said before, if they don't have a photo ID, they're going to need 2 things with their name on it in the state of Missouri to get their birth certificate. To get their photo ID, they're going to need that birth certificate, proof of residence, as well as either reciting or proving their social security number. So we make sure that they have all of those items in place when they go to those particular offices. Okay? And then we do this, the last bullet point is probably my favorite bullet point. We do this with dignity for all. So everybody who comes to us, we call them a guest. For example, they are not clients, they are not customers, right? They are our guests. And that is because we want to convey that they are here, we are helping them, but they are not, they are working with us. We are not working over them or providing everything for them. We are working in conjunction. We are working in conjunction with them. All right, so how much do y'all want to know about the document process?
You could do a quick overview.
Okay, I did take out a lot of slides because I feel like it gets to be a lot sometimes, but I think what we'll do as we go through this is maybe even talk about some of the challenges that we can face with each of these, okay? So for a birth certificate, I've talked about this already. For a Missouri birth certificate, you have to show a photo ID or two things with your name on it, all right? That could be almost anything. We also have the ability to provide one of those items, and one of those items is a letter that essentially says, we know Joe Smith is Joe Smith, so give Joe Smith his birth certificate, right? And then they come in with something else that has their name on it. They take the application, and we work with our guests to complete the application. We usually complete it for them so that when they go down to the Vital Records office, it is completed, and it's completed correctly. And then we give them payment. So pretty straightforward. There is one change in this, and I think this is a pretty big win. Sarah and Christine Dragonette, who heads up the college church program, worked with the Vital Records office at the city of St. Louis. So city Vital Records office, not the county Vital Records office, because those two are different in St. Louis. If somebody is eligible for a free ID to vote, they are also now eligible for a free birth certificate. So when it comes to payment, I can stamp put a red stamp on the application, and they will get it for free. So that is a huge, huge win. Except when I forget to stamp it, and then it's not a huge win. I called down and talked to the supervisor one day when we realized we forgot that, and I was told that was the last time. So I am on. I've been warned. We've got to get that red stamp on there. So again, fairly straightforward in the state of Missouri. Out-of-state birth certificates, not straightforward. Every state has their own rules on what's required to obtain a birth certificate. Every state has their own rules on who can apply for a birth certificate. Every state has their own process, has their own cost structure. It is completely different. And even counties within the same state, different. And so here's where we really have to get into some problem solving. And for folks who live outside, for folks who are born outside of Missouri, this is where a lot of the challenges that we face come from. I could tell you some of the more difficult states to get birth certificates from. And when somebody comes to me from Arkansas, Georgia, Texas, it's tough. It's very tough. Indiana is not my favorite either. Ohio is great. Although Ohio is the only state I've come across where they are public record. So as long as you know the information on somebody's birth, you can get their birth certificate. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. I know, but it makes it relatively easy. What's that?
I don't think that's a very good idea.
No, I'm not sure it's a very good idea either. But that is the way it is, and makes it easier on us. But I'm not sure in the long run it's a really Really great idea. So, this is where we get into some problem solving. We have to figure out, what does each state need? All right, what are the requirements? Where's the form? Is it better for our guests to have us apply online? Is it better for our guests to have us apply through the state or through the county? Normally it's the county. Although if somebody is born in Cook County, I will almost never, ever, ever apply for a birth certificate through Cook County because it takes way too long. But those are just some of the things that we have to figure out when we're going through this. There are times when we will apply online. There's something called Vital Check. Has anybody used Vital Check? No. It's fairly straightforward. Most of the time, instead of photo ID, for example, being submitted, somebody's answering 4 questions that in theory, they're probably the only ones that know the answer to. Like, which of these addresses were you not ever associated with? Those kinds of things, to authenticate them. And we will do that if we have a really tough situation, or somebody doesn't have the documents that they need in order to get their photo ID. Their birth certificate. How many? Yeah.
Do you ever have to do international birth certificates?
International birth certificates. Do we ever do those? Sometimes. If the individual was born in a territory that is a territory of the United States, so for example, Puerto Rico, we'll do. The other thing that we do is for people who were born overseas. We go through the State Department. So they're American citizens, but they were born overseas. So a lot of times when individuals' parents were in the military, they were born in a military base, so a U.S. citizen. But we have to go through the State Department, which is its own battle to do that. It's a very interesting, long form to fill out in order to get a birth certificate from the State Department. But if we had somebody come in that was born, I believe, in Nigeria or something like that. No, that is outside our scope. That's outside our scope. Yes, ma'am.
What happens if somebody just never had a birth certificate, they weren't born in a hospital, or?
Yep. So if somebody has never had a birth certificate or wasn't born in a hospital, that's one of the issues I mentioned that earlier, that we've been working with somebody for about 1.5 years. There are a couple issues in his case, but that's one of them. We also did have somebody else from Georgia, an older gentleman that was not born in a hospital, was born at home. Sometimes there are birth records that exist in that case, and we can kind of find them. Other times we are helping people submit what is called a delayed record of birth. And so they have to submit all the stuff to actually get the record in the system and then apply for the birth certificate. Yeah, we see that more from, I would say, some of the southern states, and most of the folks that we have encountered that are in that situation have been African American. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen to other folks, but that's what we have seen. But yeah, yes,
So
sir.
I'm assuming the same thing applies to people who were born and only documented through a church.
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody was born and it's documented in a church or in the family Bible, for example, and not with the state or with the county at that time, if we have to, we can help people go back and submit a delayed record of birth. Yes, ma'am.
What happens, and this has happened actually in the older generations in my family twice, is that the birth certificate was filed, but the names were different.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my grandmother's name was Mary Ellen, but nobody ever called her that. They called her May. So
Yep.
when they tried to get May's birth certificate, nobody heard of her. What is this? It doesn't exist. So
Yeah.
how do they do things like that?
Yeah, exactly. So the question is around if somebody's birth name is Mary Ellen, but everybody calls her May, and then there's no birth certificate in May's name, what do you do? So first of all, hopefully somebody knows it at some point. Her name was Mary Ellen, and can go get that birth certificate if it's needed. Otherwise, it's going to take a court order, most likely, to change the name on the birth certificate, which is not. I mean, it takes time, right? And obviously, it has to be submitted and all that. But it's not an ungodly process to do that. We did have one individual whose birth certificate had no first name, just the last name. And again, this was a gentleman in his 60s. And we submitted, we were able to do this without a court order. We submitted for a change, correction to the record, because that individual had, I don't know how long he'd been holding on to these, but school records. And, you know, it was still handwritten, you know, with his grade. So he had school records for several years with his first name and his last name. His first name, last name. So the state accepted that as enough proof that that was his name to go ahead and change it on the official record. So in theory, if May had something similar, that could happen too. But most of the time, it's going to take a court order. Yes, ma'am.
What about for trans individuals that aren't using their dead name anymore or something?
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So for trans individuals who go by a different name or have a different legal name, maybe then, yeah. So that's gotten, I'd say, a bit more complicated in the state of Missouri at this point. Used to be, well, to some extent, the legal name has to be on the photo ID. I mean, there's really no way of getting around that. There are ways to change the legal name. Where it's gotten a little more challenging in the state of Missouri is the gender marker itself. Used to be that individuals could say that they identify as male or female, and that's what would be on there. That is no longer the case, and that changed in the last year. So changing a name, again, would require a court order, and anybody can do that really for any reason. So someone who wants a different name on the photo ID would need to go through that process. Good questions. So I have a question. How much time do I have?
5 minutes.
Woo! Okay. We are moving on. So we talked about this as well. For Missouri State ID, you have to prove your identity, which most of the time is a birth certificate, your lawful status, which most of the time is also a birth certificate, but also could be things like a permanent resident card, naturalization paperwork for folks that have not been born in the United States. Missouri residency, so bill of some sort, medical paperwork. They're kind of picky. It used to be you could take in a birthday card from Aunt Mary. You can't do that anymore, so it has to be something a little bit more official. Social Security we talked about. You either have to prove it or recite it and then take the payment. Okay. Talk just real quick about Missouri residency. I'd say about half the folks that we see in our program do not have stable housing. So they do not have that proof of residence. There is a relatively new, I'd say in the last 3 or 4 years, form, the lovely 5862, that allows us to permit our guests to use our address. And so they can get their photo ID, they get it mailed to us, and then we connect with them so that they get it in their hands. Okay? Because without this, there's a whole segment of folks that just would be ineligible to get a photo ID because they could not prove Missouri residence. Was there a question? Yes?
I have one. How does the passport come into this? Because I know when I renewed my license and they were asking for all kinds of documents, marriage certificates, whatever. So I took a whole bunch of things with me, including my passport. We're all lined up. and one of these poor hairy people behind the counter finally said, "Does anybody have a passport?" And I said, yeah, come right over here.
Uh-huh.
Bang, bang, bang. I had my renewed license.
Yeah.
And I was out of there.
So question is around the passport and why does that speed things up, or how does that work? Because you've already proven to the United States government, you got your birth certificate, your social, like you've proven stuff already, they will accept that at the state level. Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna throw a monkey wrench in that one. Our oldest kid is adopted, and we adopted her, and without her certificate of citizenship, the passport does not prove she's an American citizen.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. People have gotten deported.
Okay, don't tell me that, because my daughter's adopted as well.
From where?
Belarus.
China. Yeah, so we'll talk after.
Yeah.
Seriously. What
Yeah.
year?
Great. Well, actually, yesterday was her adoption day. So that would have been 19, I don't know, she's 25 years ago. I have to do math.
You might be okay. We'll talk about it after.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Don't scare me. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about the
It's
working
very
model,
scary.
as far as what a day is like. Does it cap?
Oh.
How many people do you process? How many people come in?
That's a good
Is it a
question.
one-day stop and shop, or?
Hey, thanks. Really good question. Yeah, so our program's open on Thursdays. College Church is open on Tuesdays, and then there are a couple others throughout the city that I'm less familiar with. So generally, a program is open for a given set of hours on a given day during the week. We operate by appointment. Most of the time. We will take walk-ins, although it's not guaranteed we will be able to see them. So we operate by appointment. Our capacity is about 40 people in a given day. Although last Thursday, when I was not there because I was sick, we had a record probably. Linda will probably tell us when the date is entered, of 51. I remember the days when we would have 11. So we have grown. And College Church has not decreased. So even though we have added additional capacity, the need is still there. And generally speaking, a guest will come to us once and have everything that they need. The exception is, for example, when somebody comes to us and they need a birth certificate from a place that we know will take a long time. New York State, California, those are a couple of the big ones. We will have them come back because our check will be expired by the time they get their birth certificate in. Yes, ma'am. How are we funded? Good question. Couple different ways. We are funded by individuals such as yourself. And then we also do have a Ashrei Foundation for Health grant that was awarded about a year ago. So we're in the second of the third of 3 years, and that grant that was almost $600,000. It's not just for us. That also promotes capacity building throughout the state, as well as the Missouri State ID Coalition. So it's not just for us, but we do have a portion of that funding. Yes, sir.
Do you have employees or volunteers? Or
Yes,
both?
great question. There are 4 employees at this point. 2.5 are dedicated to Ashrei. 1 is dedicated to the statewide coalition. I am the half. I work part-time, and I try to keep it pretty much 2 part-time. And then we have 2 full-time employees. We have our executive director, and then we have our director of everything else. I mean, Alana does all sorts of things.
Do you have any
And then the rest are volunteers.
You do have volunteers.
Yes, so we have up to 12 volunteers every week supporting our work.
Cool.
Okay, great. I'm sensing by the fact that Bill's standing up that my time is done. I appreciate so much your attention, your questions. This is work that continues and will continue to go on. If you have the desire to join us or learn more, would love to talk to you about that. Thank you.